Dusty's dream. The Montana sun scorched Dusty River's face as he fought to open a bulky gate, its hinges shrieking their displeasure. Heat shimmered above the cracked earth where dust devils pirouette, mirroring the unease churning within him. Another dawn broke, painting the same solitary vista. He scanned the river's ranch, his inheritance, an expanse that met the far horizon. Distant cattle calls offered a familiar sound, a comfort that only partially eased the emptiness gnawing at his core. He craved more than bovine company and endless space. He yearned for a partner, a woman to share the painted skies, to chase away the chill of his solitude. Yet, the prospect of courtship filled him with dread. He saw himself, a clumsy fool, attempting to impress a lady. Sarah Jenkins, the baker's daughter from Harmony Creek, swam into his thoughts. He pictured the imagined encounter, hat clutched in hand, the sun flashing on his buckle. "Mornin', Miss Jenkins," he'd croak, his voice raspy and unsure. "Nice weather for baking." In his mind's eye, Sarah would giggle politely, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Indeed, Mr. Rivers." Seeking a fresh loaf, he'd stammer, perspiration slicking his brow. "Well, ma'am, I was hoping maybe you'd care to, perhaps, join me for a drive sometime." The phantom Sarah would erupt in laughter, a sound that mocked him from the depths of his mind. "A drive, Mr. Rivers? We barely know each other." Defeated, he'd retreat, mumbling apologies, dust devils swallowing him as he fled. He sighed, scuffing a stone. Fantasies always concluded the same way. Him alone, the object of gentle ridicule. He felt too rough-hewn, too entrenched in his ways. The women of Harmony Creek deserved more than a dusty, tongue-tied rancher. He spent the morning repairing fences, the hammer's percussive rhythm a temporary salve for his thoughts. He hummed a forgotten melody, off-key and wavering, the sound lost in the vast Montana air. As the sun ascended, the heat intensified, distorting the horizon. Pausing to wipe his brow with a soiled handkerchief, he noticed a plume of dust, thicker and darker than any he'd witnessed, surging in the distance. It advanced slowly, relentlessly, towards his ranch. Squinting, he strained to identify the source. As it neared, he distinguished the outline of a dilapidated wagon, drawn by a team of weary horses. Curiosity eclipsing his hesitation, Dusty dropped his hammer and approached. He now saw that the wagon was crammed, not with goods, but with children. 7 in total, a ragtag bunch, spanning from a tottering toddler to a teenager with haunted eyes. Their attire was tattered and coated in grime, their faces etched with exhaustion and streaked with dirt. They stared at him, a blend of fear and tentative hope in their gazes. The wagon creaked to a halt, silence punctuated only by the horses' soft whinnies and the whisper of the wind. No driver, no adult in sight. The eldest girl, perhaps 14, clambered down, her movements jerky and uncertain. Gaunt, with tangled, matted dark hair, she fixed her pleading eyes on Dusty. "Mister," she whispered, her voice frail. "We need help." Dusty stood paralyzed, his mind reeling. 7 children? Abandoned? What in the world was happening? He'd anticipated, well, nothing, certainly not this. The carefully constructed world of his solitude was fracturing before his eyes. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly parched. "Help?" he rasped, his voice in used accompany. "What kind of help?" The girl hesitated, her gaze flitting towards the younger children huddled within the wagon. We have nowhere," she said, her voice trembling. "Our pa, he's gone, and we don't have any family." Dusty stared, his heart plummeting. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the premature weariness on her young face. He saw the small ones, their faces smudged, their eyes wide with uncertainty. He saw the wagon, its dilapidated state a testament to a grueling journey. In that instant, he knew his life had irrevocably altered. The rancher who dreamt of a wife now confronted 7 forsaken children. His yearning for companionship had arrived, not as he'd imagined, but infinitely more challenging, complex, and potentially more rewarding. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the sudden hush. "Well," he declared, his voice resonating with newfound resolve. "Seems you've come to the right place. Welcome to Rivers Ranch." He had no idea what he was doing, but turning them away was unthinkable. 7 little strangers. Dusty went to one knee, the scrape of his jeans a coarse whisper against the baked earth. He'd brought water, and the eldest, the boy burdened with an adult's worries etched on his youthful face, accepted the offering on behalf of the others. 7 pairs of eyes, guarded and luminous, tracked his every move. He couldn't recall ever seeing so many kids clustered together. "You said your can, they're gone." Dusty rasped, the question catching in his throat. The boy, Ben, he'd learned, gulped. "Fell ill. Something fierce. Pa went first, then Ma. We laid them to rest, over yonder." He gestured east toward the boundless prairie. The air tasted of dust and heartache. A little girl, perhaps 5, her blonde pigtails a tangled mess and a smudge marring her cheek, whimpered quietly. Ben wrapped an arm around her. "Hush, Lilybug. We're all right." A strange ache resonated within Dusty. He cleared his throat again. "All right. I haven't promised you anything." Ben's gaze sharpened. "We're not begging, mister. Just need a place to catch our breath. We're all willing hands." Dusty straightened, his frame towering over them. He raked a hand through his already unruly hair. "Willing hands? Doing what exactly?" He faltered, searching for a delicate way to phrase it. They were just kids, thrown to the wolves in a brutal land. "I can handle an axe," Ben declared, his voice steady. "Mary's a decent cook. Thomas is good with critters. And the little ones, they can run errands, help out." Dusty surveyed the motley crew. Mary, around 10, clung to a younger boy with hair like live embers. Thomas, maybe 8, met Dusty's gaze with a mix of fear and defiance. And the tiny ones, Lily, and 2 even smaller, their ages blurred beneath layers of grime and fatigue. He pictured his desolate house, the echoing silence in every room. The overflowing woodpile came to mind, as did the overgrown garden, the dilapidated chicken coop, and the loneliness, his constant shadow. "How long have you been out here alone?" Ben hesitated, a shadow crossing his face. 3 weeks, maybe closer to a month. Time's gotten away from me." Dusty cursed under his breath. Weeks. They'd been surviving on their wits for weeks. He studied Ben, truly saw him, not just as a child, but as a young man prematurely hardened by hardship. "Got some spare rooms upstairs," Dusty conceded, the words feeling stiff and unfamiliar. "Nothing fancy, but they're dry." A spark of hope flickered in Ben's tired eyes. "You mean we can stay?" Dusty shrugged, trying to appear indifferent. "Just for a while, until you figure out your next move." He knew, even as he said it, that it was a fabrication. Where else would they go? What else could they do? Ben nodded, his tense shoulders easing slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Rivers. Dusty Rivers." He motioned towards the dwelling. "Come on, let's get you inside. Night's coming fast." The children trailed after him, their footsteps tentative on the porch planks. Dusty shoved open the door, releasing a stale, forgotten scent. He hadn't bothered to air out the place in months. He led them up the groaning staircase to a series of small, sparsely appointed rooms. Dust motes swirled in the sunbeams, slicing through the smudged windows. "This one's yours," Dusty announced, pushing open the door to the largest chamber. "Blankets are in the trunk. Make yourselves a home for the time being." Ben shepherded his siblings into the room, his gaze absorbing every detail. He faced Dusty, his expression veiled. "We won't cause any problems, Mr. Rivers. You have our word." Dusty merely nodded, avoiding his gaze. He retreated, leaving the 7 little waifs to their own devices. As he descended the stairs, he heard the hushed murmurs of voices, the rustle of fabric, the muffled sounds of children's tears. He stopped at the bottom, his hand clenching the worn railing. What on earth had he just done? Chaos and kindness. The first rays of dawn sliced through the cracks in the cabin walls, painting stripes across the floor. Dusty groaned, pulling the scratchy wool blanket over his head. It didn't muffle the sounds, the high-pitched giggle of a child, the thump of small feet, the the clatter of something metal hitting the wooden floor. He was used to the quiet, the kind that settled deep in your bones and let you hear the rustle of the wind miles away. This was a cacophony. He finally succumbed, throwing back the covers and sitting up. The sight that greeted him was pure, unadulterated chaos. Toys he hadn't even known he owned were scattered across the room. A small mountain of blankets and pillows had been erected in the corner. And Lily, her face smeared with something that looked suspiciously like axle grease, was beaming at him. "Morning, Dusty," she chirped, launching herself at him. He instinctively flinched, but she wrapped her tiny arms around his neck, burying her face in his beard. He smelled dust and something vaguely sweet like wildflowers. "Morning, Lily," he mumbled, patting her awkwardly on the back. He glanced around, trying to assess the damage. Where were the others? As if on cue, Ben appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Sorry about this," he said, gesturing to the wreckage with a nod of his head. They got a little excited. A little. Dusty raised an eyebrow. "We were just playing pioneer camp," chirped young Timmy, poking his head out from behind the blanket fort. Dusty sighed. He needed coffee. Strong coffee. "All right, everyone. Breakfast. Then we clean this up." The attempt at breakfast was another exercise in controlled pandemonium. 7 small bodies jostled for position at the table, grabbing at the pan of scrambled eggs he'd managed to cook. Flour mysteriously ended up on the ceiling, courtesy of an overly enthusiastic Sarah trying to help with the biscuits. And little Mikey decided the dog's water bowl was a swimming pool for his toy soldiers. Dusty found himself snapping more than once, his voice sharper than he intended. Ben, he noticed, was trying to mediate, quietly correcting the younger ones and offering Dusty apologetic glances. After breakfast, the cleaning commenced, and that's when the real mishaps began. Emily, trying to dust the mantelpiece, knocked over a framed photograph of Dusty's parents. The glass shattered, scattering shards across the floor. She burst into tears. "It's okay," Dusty said, kneeling beside her. "Accidents happen." He carefully picked up the photo, his fingers tracing the faded image of his smiling mother. He hadn't looked at this in years. Meanwhile, outside, Ben and the older boys were attempting to help with the chores. Dusty had tasked them with gathering eggs from the henhouse. He should have known better. He heard a squawk, followed by a chorus of shouts and the frantic flapping of wings. He rushed outside to find Ben covered in feathers, chasing a runaway chicken. The other boys were doubled over with laughter. That evening, after a surprisingly quiet supper, Dusty found himself sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Lily, as usual, was glued to his side, her small hand tucked into his. "Dusty," she asked, her voice soft. "Yeah, Lily? Are we staying here forever?" He hesitated. He didn't know. He hadn't thought that far ahead. "We'll see." "Lily," he said finally. "We'll see." She snuggled closer, leaning her head against his arm. "I like it here," she whispered. "You're nice." Dusty felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. He wasn't nice. He was gruff, solitary, and ill-equipped to handle a house full of children. But Lily's simple affection, her unquestioning acceptance, was starting to chip away at the walls he'd built around himself. As the stars began to prick the darkening sky, he knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same. The chaos was overwhelming, the responsibility daunting. But amidst the mess and the mishaps, there was a glimmer of something else, something akin to kindness. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth all the trouble in the world. A city woman's offer. The dust hadn't even settled from the battered pickup when a Lincoln Town car, gleaming like a black mirror, crunched to a stop in the yard. It was so out of place, it looked like a misplaced chess piece on a checkerboard. Dusty squinted, his hand instinctively going to the worn leather holster at his hip, though he knew it was just habit. He hadn't needed the Colt in years. A woman unfolded herself in the back seat, all sharp angles and crisp linen. Her heels sank slightly into the parched earth as she walked toward him, her polished nails glinting in the afternoon sun. She had the kind of tailored elegance that screamed city, a stark contrast to the worn-out landscape and Dusty's own weathered appearance. Mr. Rivers? Her voice was as smooth as polished stone. Dusty nodded, his gaze unwavering. That's right. And you are? Clara Sterling. I believe you're temporarily housing several children. He crossed his arms, the movement pulling at the seams of his worn denim shirt. That's one way of putting it. He wasn't about to volunteer any more information. He didn't like her, this woman. He didn't trust her. Clara offered a tight, practiced smile. I read about them in the newspaper. A rather touching story. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the dilapidated ranch house. Though perhaps not the most ideal environment for children. Dusty's jaw tightened. They're fed, they're safe, and they got a roof over their heads. That's more than some get. Of course, Clara said quickly, her tone placating. I wouldn't presume to judge. However, I believe I could offer one of them a significantly better life. The blood turned to ice in Dusty's veins. What are you saying? I'm looking to adopt. I've been researching adoption agencies, but when I saw the article about these children, well, it felt serendipitous. I have the resources, the space, the capacity to provide a loving and stable home. A proper education, cultural enrichment, opportunities they simply wouldn't have here. Dusty stared at her, the silence thick with suspicion. He could hear the distant shouts of the children playing near the creek, their laughter a fragile melody against the backdrop of his guarded heart. Which one you got your eye on? He asked, his voice dangerously low. Clara hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. I haven't decided. I like to meet them, of course. Observe their personalities. Find the right fit. The right fit. Dusty repeated, the words laced with scorn. These ain't puppies in a pound, lady. They're kids. They've been through enough already without being picked apart like some prize livestock. Clara's perfect composure seemed to crack slightly. I assure you, Mr. Rivers, my intentions are entirely honorable. I simply wish to provide a child with a future they wouldn't otherwise have. Their future's here, Dusty said, gesturing around with a sweep of his arm. Right here on this ranch. With each other. But surely you can see what? That you think you can waltz in here with your fancy car and your fancy words and buy yourself a kid like you're picking out a new handbag? I don't think so. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. These kids are staying right here. And if you know what's good for you, you'll get back in that Lincoln of yours and drive right back to whatever city you crawled out of. Clara stood her ground, though her face had paled slightly. You can't just keep them here, Mr. Rivers. You're not their legal guardian. Social services will be involved eventually, and they'll make their own assessment. Let him come, Dusty said, his voice hard. They'll see these kids are happy. They're safe, and they're damn sure not for sale. He watched as Clara, defeated but not entirely deterred, turned and walked back to her car. The engine roared to life, shattering the fragile peace of the afternoon. As the Lincoln Town car sped away, kicking up a cloud of dust, Dusty stood his ground, a lone figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He knew this wasn't the end of it. This city woman, with her promises and her money, would be back. And he'd be ready. Lily's choice. The aroma of lavender and something subtly sweet, like spun sugar, invaded the familiar scent of dust and hay. Clara Sterling had taken root in the living room, a brightly colored exotic bird amidst weathered wood and worn leather. Today, her focus was entirely on Lily. A mountain of pastel-colored boxes sat precariously on the worn rug, each tied with satin ribbon. Clara gestured towards them with a manicured hand, her smile dazzling, yet somehow unsettling. These are all for you, darling. Just a little something to show you what life could be like. Lily, usually a whirlwind of energy, stood stiffly beside Dusty, her small hand gripping his calloused one. He could feel the tremor that ran through her. He tried to prepare her, to explain that Clara's intentions, however misguided, weren't necessarily malicious. But how did you explain the unexplainable yearning that could bloom in the barren landscape of a child's heart? Clara plucked a box from the top and presented it to Lily. Go on, open it. It's a little dress, just your size. Parisian silk, you know. Lily remained rooted to the spot. Dusty knelt beside her, his voice a low rumble. It's all right, Lilybug. You don't have to if you don't want to. With a hesitant glance at Dusty, Lily reached for the box. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a dress the color of summer sky, embroidered with tiny seed pearls. It shimmered under the afternoon sun streaming through the window. Clara clapped her hands. Isn't it divine? I saw it and immediately thought of you. Imagine Lily wearing dresses like this every day. Dancing lessons, art classes, trips to the theater. Her voice was a silken thread, weaving a tapestry of a life far removed from the dusty reality of the ranch. Dusty watched Lily's face, searching for any sign of the allure Clara was trying to conjure. But all he saw was a quiet, almost heartbreaking resolve. Another box revealed a porcelain doll with cascading golden curls and eyes that seemed to follow Lily's every move. She's a limited edition, Clara chirped. The finest French craftsmanship. She needs a good home, someone to love her. Lily took the doll, her fingers tracing the delicate features. But instead of cradling it, she held it out to Dusty. She's pretty, she whispered, but maybe Maggie would like her more. Dusty took the doll, his gaze meeting Clara's. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, frustration, perhaps, or a hint of desperation. Clara changed tactics. Lily, darling, think about the opportunities. You could have anything you want. A big, beautiful room all to yourself, filled with toys and books. A personal tutor to help you with your studies. You could be anything you want to be. Lily looked up at Dusty, her eyes wide and pleading. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. And what about my brothers and sisters? Lily asked, her voice barely audible. Would they come too? Clara's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Well, darling, adoption is a very complicated process. It's not always possible to keep siblings together. But you are special. You deserve the best. Dusty stood, his frame towering over Clara. They all deserve the best, Miss Sterling. And the best for them is to stay together. Clara rose to meet his gaze, her own hardening. Don't you see, Mr. Rivers? You can't possibly provide for them the way I can. They need stability, security, a proper education. They have a home, Dusty said, his voice low and steady. They have each other, and they have me. He turned to Lily. Lilybug, this is your choice. Nobody can make it for you. Do you want to go with Miss Sterling? The silence in the room was thick, heavy with unspoken emotions. Lily looked from Dusty to Clara, her face a mask of confusion and pain. Then, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Dusty's leg, burying her face in his worn jeans. No, she whispered, her voice muffled. I want to stay here, with you, with Maggie and Tom, and all of them. Clara's face tightened. Lily, you don't understand what you're giving up. Lily looked up at Clara, her eyes filled with a fierce determination that belied her age. I understand that this is my home, and Dusty is my family. Dusty felt a surge of protectiveness so strong it almost knocked him off his feet. He knelt and scooped Lily into his arms, holding her tight. I think it's time for you to leave, Miss Sterling, he said, his voice firm. Clara stood her ground, her eyes blazing. This isn't over, Mr. Rivers. I will be back, and I will get what I want. She swept out of the house, leaving behind a trail of lavender and the wreckage of her discarded promises. The pastel boxes sat like mocking monuments to a life Lily didn't want, a future that wasn't hers. Dusty held Lily close, rocking her gently. The ranch was quiet, save for the distant call of a coyote and the soft sobs that racked Lily's small body. He knew this was just the beginning. The storm had only just begun to gather on the horizon. Stormy realizations. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the eaves of the house. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the outside world into a gray, swirling mess. Dusty stood at the window, his jaw tight, watching the approaching storm with a grim expression. It wasn't just a storm. It was a full-blown tempest, the kind that could rip a ranch apart in a matter of hours. Ben, he called out, his voice barely audible above the wind's roar. Get everyone down to the cellar. Now! Ben, ever the responsible one, immediately sprang into action, his small frame buzzing with nervous energy. Lily grabbed Thomas. Mary, help with the twins. Hurry! The children, their faces pale with apprehension, scrambled to obey. Even young Thomas, usually so full of mischief, seemed subdued by the ferocity of the storm. Dusty grabbed his oilskins and hat. "I need to check the barn," he said, his gaze meeting Ben's. "Make sure everyone stays put." Ben nodded, his eyes wide. "Be careful, Dusty." Dusty plunged into the storm. The wind nearly ripped the door from his grasp as he fought his way towards the barn. The rain stung his face like needles, and the wind threatened to knock him off his feet. He could hear the panicked cries of the livestock above the storm's fury. The barn door was already creaking ominously, its hinges straining under the wind's assault. Dusty wrestled with the latch, finally managing to secure it just as a gust of wind threatened to tear it off completely. Inside, the animals were huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. He moved quickly, checking the stalls, reinforcing the supports where he could. Suddenly, he heard a frantic bleating coming from the far corner. He hurried over to find a newborn calf, separated from its mother and shivering uncontrollably. The calf's mother was bellowing, pacing restlessly in her stall. Dusty knew that the calf wouldn't survive long in this weather. He needed to get it inside the house, but the storm was too intense to carry it. Just then, he saw a figure struggling towards the barn through the rain. It was Ben, his face etched with worry. "Dusty, I saw the calf. Can I help?" Ben shouted over the wind. Dusty hesitated. It was too dangerous for the boy to be out in this weather. But he also knew that he couldn't handle this alone. "All right," he said, "but stay close. We need to get this calf inside." Ben's eyes lit up with determination. "I have an idea." He pointed to a large feed sack lying nearby. "We can put the calf in here and drag it." Dusty looked at Ben, surprised by his quick thinking. It was a risky plan, but it was their only chance. Together, they managed to coax the shivering calf into the sack. The calf protested with weak bleats, but they managed to secure it. They worked together, Ben pulling on the rope attached to the sack, Dusty pushing from behind, struggling against the wind and rain. The journey back to the house was a grueling test of endurance. The wind buffeted them from all sides, and the rain made the ground treacherous. Several times, they nearly lost their footing, but they pressed on, driven by a shared sense of purpose. Finally, they reached the house, soaked to the bone and exhausted. They dragged the sack into the cellar, where the other children were huddled together. Lily gasped when she saw the calf. "Oh, the poor thing!" she cried, rushing to its side. The children huddled around the calf, offering it warmth and comfort. Ben helped Dusty get the calf out of the sack and wrap it in a warm blanket. Slowly, the calf began to calm down, its shivering subsiding. Dusty watched the children, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and gratitude. They had faced the storm together, and they had emerged stronger for it. He looked at Ben, his eyes filled with newfound respect. The boy was more resourceful and brave than he had given him credit for. As the storm raged outside, a sense of warmth and camaraderie filled the cellar. They were a family, bound together by circumstance and forged in the crucible of adversity. Dusty knew, with a certainty that surprised even himself, that he would do anything to protect them. The storm continued for hours, but inside the cellar, they found solace in each other's company. They told stories, sang songs, and shared whatever food they had on hand. As the night wore on, the storm began to subside, its fury gradually diminishing. When dawn finally broke, the sky was clear and the air was still. The ranch was a mess, littered with debris and fallen branches. But the barn was still standing and the animals were safe. And in the cellar, a newfound sense of hope had taken root. Unbreakable bonds. Clara watched from the window as the tempestuous rain obscured the already vague horizon. A jagged streak of lightning momentarily spotlighted the barn, where Dusty and Ben grappled with a quivering calf, maneuvering it into a makeshift pen. The panes shuddered as a blustery wind hit, and little Mary whimpered, clinging to her worn teddy. Clara knelt, offering comfort. "It's all right, love. Dusty and Ben are seeing to the animals." Yet, her reassurance felt hollow, even to her. Loner Ranch had been a professional assignment, assess the children's well-being, determine their prospects, and potentially find a new home for Lily, the quiet artist. But the storm had dissolved her detachment, leaving only a woman facing nature's fury and the resilient spirit of an unconventional family. Ben then emerged from the barn, drenched but grinning, hurrying toward the house. His cheeks were flushed with exertion and something akin to pride. He burst inside, shaking droplets like a wet dog. Got her settled. Dusty's mending the stall roof now. She'll be fine. Mary launched herself at him, burying her face in his sodden jacket. Thanks, Ben. He tousled her hair. Anything for my best girl. Clara absorbed the easy exchange, the silent language of belonging that bound them. It was more than kinship, it was a pact. Later, as the tempest began to relent, Dusty ambled in, lines of weariness etched on his face, though his eyes held a glint Clara couldn't quite place. Resignation? Or a deeper satisfaction? A nod toward Clara was all he offered. Everyone's accounted for. Animals are secure, and the house is mostly watertight. He swiped at his hair, smearing mud across his brow. Thank you, Dusty, Clara said, surprised by the genuine warmth in her tone. You were extraordinary. He brushed off her words with a shrug, just doing what needed doing. His gaze lingered on the children huddled near the hearth, their faces animated by the dancing flames. They're hardy kids. A little rain won't hurt them. But Clara had witnessed more than mere grit. She'd seen valor, fortitude, and unyielding devotion to one another. She had seen Ben, scarcely past boyhood, shouldering responsibilities beyond his years. She had seen Lily, so often withdrawn, soothing a frightened Sarah. And she had seen Dusty, the taciturn rancher, risking himself to safeguard a newborn calf and his makeshift brood. As the lingering storm clouds dispersed, a shard of sunlight pierced through, illuminating a patch of pasture previously veiled by the deluge. A glint caught Clara's eye, a small pool reflecting the heavens. Dusty, she pointed. What's that? He followed her line of sight, his brow knitted in puzzlement. Snatching up his hat, he strode out to investigate, Clara in tow. Reaching the shimmering patch, they realized it wasn't a mere puddle. It was a spring welling up from the earth, its water pristine and icy. Dusty knelt, cupping his hands to drink deeply. He looked up at Clara, astonishment widening his eyes. Well, I'll be damned, he breathed. A spring. After all this time, Clara understood the implications. In this unforgiving landscape, water was paramount. A dependable source could revitalize the ranch, guarantee its future. It was a lifeline, both immediate and enduring. Standing beside the newfound spring, clarity arrived. She now grasped the profundity of the bond between Dusty and the children. She recognized the fierce protectiveness smoldering within Dusty's gaze. And she knew she couldn't tear Lily away, not merely because of the spring's potential, but because it would be akin to slashing a tapestry, unraveling the threads connecting this unusual family. The storm had not just unearthed a spring. It had revealed a connection that could not be broken. Her task was complete. She had her answer. Turning to Dusty, she offered a gentle smile. They belong here, Dusty. All of them. A community united. The tempest had relented, leaving a wounded landscape gasping for breath. The atmosphere, scrubbed immaculate, carried the fragrance of soaked soil and evergreens. Dusty surveyed the barn's ruins, its ribs of timber exposed in a ghastly architecture. Salvage was accomplished, but the rebuilding seemed an impossible burden. Clara approached, concern furrowing her brow. Dusty, let me lend a hand. A checkbook emerged from her purse. Consider it an investment in rebuilding. His jaw hardened. Accepting charity was foreign, unwelcome. I appreciate it, but I'll make do. How, Dusty? Clara's tone was gentle but firm. You have 7 kids to feed, a livelihood to resurrect. This calls for the strength of many, not the burden of one. Let me share it. He met her gaze, discerning not pity, but authentic compassion. After an extended pause, he relented with a nod. Fine, but it's a loan. Clara's smile bloomed. We'll see about that. News traveled like wildfire. Clara, with a few calls, Maggie, the neighborhood matriarch, went to work on her archaic telephone, and Ben, with quiet efficiency, signaled to his older siblings that any contribution would be appreciated. The subsequent dawn broke pristine and luminous. Dusty was already amidst the wreckage when the distant growl of engines reached him. He straightened, shielding his eyes from the sun's ascent as a procession of vehicles poured onto the ranch, stirring up dust devils. Farmers, ranchers, townsfolk, faces familiar yet largely unacknowledged, emerged, bearing tools, lumber, and even casseroles. Maggie spearheaded the arrival, her eyes gleaming with resolve. "All right, Dusty," she announced. "Point us to the trouble spots." Speechless, Dusty's calloused hands worked against each other. His life had been one of solitude, of self-reliance. This deluge of support was profoundly unsettling. Ben, ever perceptive, propelled his siblings forward. "Let's go," he said softly. He grabbed a hammer and joined a cluster of men sorting the usable remnants of wood. The air vibrated, saws whined, hammers echoed, and voices mingled. Dusty found himself caught in the tide, directing the labor, dispensing advice, and accepting aid. He toiled alongside men he'd previously considered strangers, trading stories and sharing laughter. Sarah, normally reticent, assisted the women setting up a makeshift cookhouse, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Even Lily, with her artistic preferences, seized a broom, sweeping debris with focused determination. As daylight matured, the barn steadily materialized. The skeletal structure was fortified, fresh beams elevated, and the walls began their ascent. Dusty observed, his throat constricted. He saw Ben, tireless, his slender frame pushed to its limit. He spotted Clara in animated conversation with Maggie, their heads close. He witnessed a community united, collaborating to reverse the storm's devastation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ranch in long shadows, the barn was far from complete, but it stood proudly, perhaps sturdier than before. Maggie thumped Dusty's back with unexpected force. "See there, Dusty? Nobody stands alone. We're all lashed together in this life." Dusty surveyed the assemblage of faces, weary but smiling, and felt, perhaps for the first time, authentic belonging. He was more than merely Dusty Rivers, the aloof rancher. He was a fraction of something larger, resilient. He was community. He cleared his throat, emotion roughening his tone. "Thank you," he offered, his gaze encompassing all before him. "Every one of you. Words fail me." A chorus answered, "No need for words, Dusty. Happy to help. See you tomorrow." As the vehicles rumbled away, leaving in their wake a barn resurrected from the dust, Dusty stood with his impromptu family, watching them depart. The breeze whispered through the nascent frame, carrying a scent of pine and the percussion of hammers. He drew Ben close, an embrace that felt surprisingly natural. "We will finish it," he vowed, his voice ringing with new resolve. "Together, we shall." Finding family. The morning air, sharp with the scent of pine and an unsettling formality, heralded trouble. A stiff, official-looking letter dominated the kitchen table, its pristine white a stark intrusion on the familiar grain. Dusty hadn't encountered correspondence like this in ages, a ghost from a lifelong past. He lifted it, the heavy stock cool against the rough pads of his fingertips. The return address, a Chicago law firm, confirmed his dread. He tore the envelope, a nervous flutter in his chest. Legalese blurred before him, yet the cruel heart of the message pulsed clear. A distant relative of the children, one Eleanor Ainsworth, was challenging his guardianship, asserting the children deserved a proper upbringing with bloodkin. From the doorway, Ben's watchful eyes betrayed his anxiety. He'd glimpsed the letter, observed the hardening of Dusty's jaw. "What's wrong, Dusty?" Dusty lowered the offending document, his gaze locking with Ben's. "It's about you kids. A relative wants to take you." Ben's shoulders slumped imperceptibly. "Take us? Where?" The question hung in the air, thick with the unspoken dread of displacement, of losing the hard-won haven they'd forged on the ranch. "That won't happen, Ben. I give you my word." Dusty's voice, a low rasp, vibrated with unwavering resolve. The following weeks dissolved into a blur of frantic activity. The town, a steadfast bulwark, rallied behind Dusty as he braced for a custody fight. Clara, ever a blessing, helped him untangle the legal knots, securing a referral to a family law expert in Billings. Sarah, a force of nature, spearheaded a community petition showcasing their collective support. Even taciturn Mr. Henderson, seldom seen beyond his porch swing, added his shaky signature. The days were a grueling gauntlet of meetings, depositions, and the persistent ache of uncertainty. Dusty pushed himself harder than ever, not just with ranch work, but with self-improvement. He attended parenting courses, eager to better understand their needs and sharpen his communication skills. He devoted hours to the children, offering reassurance, patiently answering their questions with candor. Ben, meanwhile, shouldered even more responsibility, pitching in with chores, looking after his younger siblings, and lending Dusty his quiet strength. He observed Dusty intently, gauging his determination, probing his commitment. He needed absolute certainty that Dusty was prepared to fight tooth and nail for their family. The day of the hearing dawned, heavy with foreboding. Dusty, clad in his best suit, a relic of a bygone era, sat rigidly in the courtroom, his hands clasped tight. The children huddled beside him, their faces a mixture of trepidation and unwavering faith. Across the aisle sat Eleanor Ainsworth, a statuesque woman in an impeccable suit, her expression distant and composed. Her counsel presented their case, portraying Dusty as an unsuitable caregiver, a reclusive rancher ill-equipped to raise children. They argued for a more stable environment, a life brimming with advantage and opportunity. Then Dusty took his turn. He rose, his voice firm, and spoke from the depths of his heart. He painted a portrait of the children, highlighting their resilience, their capacity for love, their indomitable spirits. He spoke of the ranch, emphasizing the strong community ties and the liberating sense of freedom it fostered. He chronicled his own evolution, how the children had breathed purpose back into his life, giving him a reason to keep living. Clara testified, her voice ringing with conviction, about Dusty's unwavering dedication and the profound impact he had on the children's lives. Sarah presented the petition, a tangible symbol of the town's unwavering backing. When Ben took the stand, he spoke with an eloquence that belied his youth. He recounted Dusty's kindness, his patience, and his boundless affection. "He's not just taking care of us," Ben declared, his voice clear and unwavering. "He's our family, plain and simple." The judge listened intently, his gaze traveling between Dusty, the children, and Eleanor Ainsworth. After what felt like eons, he delivered his verdict. While acknowledging Ms. Ainsworth's concerns regarding the children's well-being, he ultimately ruled in Dusty's favor, citing his proven commitment, the children's evident happiness, and the overwhelming support of the community. He awarded Dusty permanent guardianship. A wave of relief washed over the courtroom. Dusty turned to the children, a broad smile illuminating his face. Ben offered a small, grateful smile of his own. The younger children surged forward, embracing Dusty in a joyous group hug. That evening, back at the ranch, after tucking the youngest into bed, Dusty sat with Ben on the porch. Stars glittered in the night sky, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. "Thank you, Ben," Dusty said, his voice thick with emotion, "for believing in me." Ben shrugged, his gaze drawn to the horizon. "You earned it, Dusty." Dusty surveyed the sleeping ranch, the looming silhouette of the barn, the 7 children nestled safely within. He had sought refuge in this place, seeking to outrun the ghosts of his past. Instead, he had stumbled upon something far richer, something he had ceased to imagine possible. He had found belonging, he had found family,